Welcome to the Family Business Audiocast on LinkedIn. I am R. Adam Smith, creator of this Audiocast series. As an entrepreneur, investor, founder, investment banker, and board leader the last 25 years, I'm fortunate for my many experiences within the family firm industry. A brief comment on why I created this broadcast. Private companies are a passion of mine, having grown up in a family of entrepreneurs and having engaged for 2 decades in deals, strategic transformations, investments, and boards with an array of fascinating family enterprises, family firms, and family offices. I founded this series to offer a useful platform for listeners to hear from veterans, academics, and leaders in the vast family firm ecosystem. Whether you're a family business owner, building, running, or advising a family office, or just expanding your family office activities, I hope these conversations are useful and enlightening. And now it's time to turn our attention to our accomplished guests on today's episode. On this episode of the Family Business Audiocast, I'm very pleased to be joined by Josh Barron, who is one of the leading voices shaping how modern family enterprises think today about governance, ownership, and long-term continuity. Josh is a senior lecturer at Harvard Business School. Josh, great to have you here today. Thank you so much.
It's great to be here. I'm a big fan of your podcast.
Thank you, sir. As I said, Josh is a senior lecturer at Harvard, where he teaches and researches family enterprise governance and ownership strategy, all the topics that we cover on the podcast. He's also a co-founder and senior advisor at Banyan Global Family Business Advisors, one of the elite organizations in the industry. And there he has advised some of the world's most sophisticated families on succession governance and multi-generational continuity. Josh is also recognized for helping shift the conversation beyond traditional succession planning towards a more broader and more institutional view of family enterprise. Family enterprise is, of course, the core of this podcast. And talking about enterprise, he focuses on not just transferring the wealth itself, but on developing capable owners, resilient governance systems, and enduring family institutions. He is also a co-author of the Harvard Business Review Family Business Handbook, which is one of the most influential modern frameworks out there today. So today we'll talk really about a critical idea, including the greatest challenges that many enterprises face today beyond creating wealth, really focusing on the stewardship and responsibility over time of that wealth. Josh, welcome to the podcast. You ready to go?
I'm ready. Let's go for it.
All right. So we'll start with the evolution of family enterprise thinking. The field is evolving from succession into really enterprise governance. That, of course, includes the issues of the complexities of families that grow beyond what happened before with more traditional family enterprise institutions and ecosystems. And of course, the rise of the family office as an institutional entity and platform. So you and Banyan and your expertise has been involved in modernizing the field that's thinking about enterprise and kind of what's changing there. I'd love to talk about that first and why is the old succession model no longer enough?
Great. Very kind of you to say that. I think as with many fields, those of us who are working today have the great privilege of standing on the shoulders of giants. And that's certainly true in this field. Look at the way that the study and thinking about family business evolved. And it's amazing that it's evolved relatively recently in the 80s and 90s. It was really based upon what seems very obvious now, but was a really critical insight at the time, which is that in this thing called a family business, you have to pay attention not just to the business, where there is plenty of attention being paid in business schools and so on, but also to the family. It's a place that deserves and needs organization and attention. And if you don't pay attention to the family, it will have spillover effects onto the business. And that really led to, I would call, a wave of innovation that sort of spread and continues to spread across the world on this topic. Things like family councils, family constitutions, that now are kind of part of the way that we think of family businesses, really came out of that initial wave. Really foundational stuff. I think that the role that I and my colleagues and others have tried to play is really this recognition that the family as a unit is really important, but what really distinguishes family businesses is the intersection between family dynamics and ownership. And the role of the family as owners is really what drives a lot of what happens in the family, in the business, in the family office. As you noted, those are increasing in complexity. And I think ownership is such a powerful, important concept. In fact, I would argue it's the most powerful force in business. It really shapes how economies evolve, how companies evolve, how families evolve. And the work that I've tried to do is to highlight the ways in which families can navigate the power that comes with ownership. I really think of there's three lenses we can look at with that. One is that ownership gives you the power to destroy assets. We look at family conflicts, family fights, Succession on HBO, or now there's a series on the Murdochs, which is real life succession drama. Family ownership has the power to take successful enterprises and make them go away very fast. It's not the only power. Families also, through their ownership, have the power to win, to compete. There's something about being owned by a family, taking that long-term time horizon that allows you to do things differently than other businesses, than other investment offices. And there's something to leverage there. And then lastly, families have the power to sustain things, to build institutions that last for generations, even for centuries. And so I think really unpacking and understanding ownership and the way that it influences both the family and the enterprise is the place that I focus the most of my time and energy.
Thanks for that, Josh. That's fantastic. I totally agree with you. It is quite an evolution, especially I think the last couple of years in the industry at both the SFO, MFO, and just the governance ecosystem as a whole. So thank you for sharing that. And also we see that Banyan is doing a great job on that front as well. Let's talk about the difference between the wealth transfer itself and the development of ownership and, let's say, wealth throughout the whole family ecosystem. And specifically, that inheritance alone does not create responsible owners. In fact, sometimes they don't want the inheritance or they're not equipped for it. And then there's also the difference between the beneficiaries of the wealth and who is going to manage the operating company, the family office, the ownership. So there's a lot of complexities there. Particularly, we see that families that prepare the heirs academically, financially, operationally, that's a great start. But then there's also the soft power, the soft skills, the psychological preparation as well. So you often talk about developing capable owners. So what does that actually mean, really? And what happens when these families transfer wealth when the capability or the preparation is not there?
Yeah, I think you've got it. I think that's a big challenge. The way that I think about ownership is you could think about a spectrum. If you think about a spectrum from, on the one end, the most active owners, active in the business, active in the office, and then the other end are those that are purely passive. And it's important to think about this spectrum because you could find kind of spaces in between. But in particular, I like to think about three distinct roles of owners. So on that active side, you have operators, those that are there day to day. They are running the business, running the office. They are the wealth creators. They're very much part of driving that forward. On the other end, you have, we can think of as investors, people that are mostly passive. They might come to an annual meeting of the family. They can vote on major decisions, but they're not really that involved in what's happening inside of the enterprise. And in the middle, one of the spaces we can think about is what we can call governors, or people that are not there day to day, but they are not purely passive. They are playing a role as sitting on the boards of directors or investment committees. They're actively involved in governing, in providing that oversight. I think what's important to realize is that the role of what it means to be a capable owner is dramatically different depending on which of those three places on the spectrum you find yourself. If you are an owner-operator, then what does it mean to be a capable owner? Well, I think it means understanding the power and the influence that comes to you because you wear not just an executive hat, but an owner hat as well. I always tell people when you work in an enterprise, you should imagine that there's a spotlight on you at all times. People are paying extra attention to what you do because not only are you their boss potentially, but also you represent the ownership of the business. And I think this is actually the most powerful role in the business world. If you combine the executive role with what comes with the ability to drive decision making as an owner. And so the skill set there is really learning, how do I use that power appropriately? How do I make sure that I'm not overstepping or leading the company, the organization in a direction that doesn't make sense, either through my actions or when people are paying attention to, I'm on vacation longer than everyone else. Like, how does that influence the culture? So there's a huge amount of influence that comes with being an owner operator. When you go to the other extreme and you think about being an owner investor, it's a very different skill set. It's more things like, how do you select managers? How do you select investments? How do you structure your investments? Because you're not going to be in a control position. You're going to be probably a minority investor in someone else's business or someone else's fund. And so you're really trying to figure out, how do I maximize my limited investment? How do I allocate across a variety of investments rather than focusing on that one opportunity? And then governors in the middle, again, a totally different set of skills that are required. There you have to figure out, how do I delegate appropriately? How do I empower those who are running the company, running the office on a day-to-day basis, but not abdicate, because I still have this really important role to play in setting direction, in defining values, in electing the people that will run our enterprise on a day-to-day basis. And so I think it's important to think about these ownership not as one capability or one skill set, but as different skill sets. And oftentimes where I see families get into trouble is that they have migrated from, for example, being owner operators where they were there every day, they knew everything about that business. Now they've sold the company and all of a sudden they are investors, or maybe they're sitting more in that kind of governance space, haven't developed that skill set. Examples of where that becomes a real challenge for a family to navigate. So understanding, where are we? What kind of an ownership approach are we taking? Do we have the skill set that matches that effectively? And if not, how do we learn it, or how do we adjust our portfolio to fit the things that we really are good at and are passionate about?
Thank you for that. Of course, we've covered that topic of preparation with many of your industry colleagues, even way back. Ron Diamond talking about the SFO, wealth transfer. So it's always covered in different ways, but there seems to be no one right answer. So having a holistic view is important. So over to governance. This is really a very practical, but again, complex topic. And we often talk about governance, especially when it gets to selling an asset, it gets particularly important, or when there's a death or a sale of the company or death of a main owner. Governance becomes super important and affects major outcomes, obviously, for lifestyles. And there seems to be just a greater school of thought of that, the communication tools and continuity of communication, vulnerability, accessibility, coordination, collaboration really is critical as underlying pins of the governance. And there are failures, obviously, for various reasons, but sometimes they occur just through emotional differences or ego or pride. So let's talk a bit about what healthy governance feels like in a functioning enterprise.
Absolutely. And I think when you don't have governance, family enterprises can feel boundaryless, they can feel complex, they can feel confusing, because you are fundamentally mixing different kinds of decisions together. And one of the things that we found is a really helpful way to start to understand and think about healthy governance is what we call the 4-room model. And the idea is, just like in your house, you do different work, you make different decisions in the kitchen versus the living room. In a family business, there are 4 different types of work to be done and decisions to be made. And they are the management room, which is where you run the business or run the office on a day-to-day basis. Lots of decisions, operational decisions, and so on. There's the boardroom, which is where you select who should be in management. You think about strategy, like where are we going over the next several years? What are the potential threats or disruptors to our business or office? Like, how do we deal with AI or things like that? You select the leaders of the business, you set their compensation. And then you have the owner room, which is where you make a relatively small number of very important decisions. Should we keep the business or sell the business? Or what does success mean for our family office? Do we want higher rates rates of growth and higher risk, or do we want more liquidity? Are there certain investments, some categories that we won't put our money into because they're counter to our values? So owners play this really important role, like selecting the board members. And you can think about that as a hierarchy. The management answers to the board, ultimately to the owners. And then we put the family room on the side because the family room is not about making business decisions. It's about things like keeping the family connected to each other. It's about developing talent, preparing people so they can find their way into the other rooms. It's also about sometimes there are family assets, things like vacation homes that aren't business, but they can cause a lot of conflict and tension if they're not managed effectively. And so what we find is whether it's a very small nuclear family or families with 500 members or anywhere in between, just really understanding that you have these 4 different spaces to work in and to develop can lead you to much healthier governance. And what happens when governance is not healthy is it feels much more like you're living in a lot where the kitchen table is also the workspace. There are no boundaries between these things. And that can cause a lot of tension. It can cause decisions to not be made. Motion is part of family businesses. You would never want to get rid of it, but you have to channel it in constructive ways. And so thinking about these 4 rooms, how you navigate them, how you set up the governance you need for each of them, how they connect to each other, I've just found makes all the difference between kind of healthy, successful dynamics and those that are much more challenging and complex and the negative kinds of emotions that could easily come with a family enterprise.
We'll see how governance evolves in the coming years as families get bigger and there's these large institutions and there's cross-border deals and consolidations and MFO scale as well. So it's a very important topic.
Yeah.
On that note, let's talk about the rise of the business family and that scale coming out of a single operating company. Typically, we talk about that often. I know your colleague, Christina Wing, and the Wingspan has been on the podcast twice, and we talked about the scale and the enterprise, and also that concept of the family, the business family rather, is referred to nicely by one of the kings of the industry, Alfredo de Masis. I like how he refers to it as the family business galaxy, which is a cool term. So looking into the business family, coming from an operator into enterprise owners, and specifically the impact of the liquidity event, these families are transitioning from like running the business to all of a sudden getting hundreds of millions or billions of dollars, and then putting aside the complexity of preparing for that, but stewarding the capital that comes out of that liquidity. So talk about that transition. Why is that transition so difficult for so many families?
I think part of the reason why it's difficult connects to what we were talking about before, that you've just fundamentally shifted what it is that the family's doing, especially if you're going from running and owning a business and understanding what it means to do that well, to maybe all of a sudden now you are investing in a number of businesses or have a diversified portfolio. It's a different set of skills, and that can make it challenging to do it well. But I think there's even a more fundamental challenge, which I'll call the purpose challenge, which is when you own a business, it has almost like a natural gravitational pull to it. It connects the family to this operating entity that has employees, and maybe it has stores or factories. It's tangible, it's real. You have a sense of what it is that you're doing and the impact and influence that has on the broader community and world around you. And that can be a very strong sense of identity for a family. If they say, like, who are we as a family? We've been in this business for decades or even longer. That can be a very powerful way to keep a family connected to each other, right? I'm writing this book on conflict right now. And one of the things I talk about is these strategies you can use to manage conflict. And one of them is purpose. The reason is because when you don't have a reason for sacrifice, a reason to do things together, we tend to be much more focused on the what's in it for me. And what happens oftentimes when you sell the business and you migrate into this broader pool of capital without a clear, compelling reason for doing it together, that's when that gravitational pull is lost and you have less of a sense as to why we should be doing this together. And In a family office, that can be especially challenging because there's always the argument that we could just take our money and bring it to whatever wealth manager people could find. There's less of a absolute need to own the capital or manage the capital. Yeah, there's some benefits that come with it, but then there's also some downsides that come with it. So it can be just harder for families to find that compelling sense of why. Like, why do this? Every successful enterprise or organization needs a powerful sense of why. And I think it can be just a little bit harder to find that when you move from a operating company environment into this sort of more broader family enterprise. I think you have to look for it. I think you have to find it. Not that it can't be done, but it's not as natural. You really have to invest your time and energy in trying to connect to that why. And if not, I think it does make this much more challenging to navigate and hold a family enterprise together.
Thank you for that. I agree. It's tricky, but you are doing a great job. The upper echelons of the industry, I think, are very caring and thoughtful and bringing objective advice and making it a business of advice, both academically and practically. We see that at Banyan. We see that, of course, at the Ultra Net Worth Institute, at Cambridge, and so on. It's evolving, I would say, into a more mature industry, but there still seems there's some imbalances, perhaps between the scale and the complexities and the willingness to engage external advice sometimes. What do you think about that?
Yeah, I think about when I joined this field about 20 years ago, no one was really talking about family offices. There were some of them around, obviously, but it was pretty rare that it was a topic of conversation. And that has just exploded over this last 10 to 15 years. I always tell people, like, the other side of a private equity transaction is probably the formation of a family office, because some entrepreneur or family has been through a liquidity event and now they need to figure out what to do with that capital that private equity fund has just paid them a lot for. I think what's been wonderful to see is as the number of family offices has increased, so has the ecosystem around it. And I think before, there really wasn't a lot of information. You'd hear people say, like, if you have below $100 million, you shouldn't start your own single family office. You should go to a multifamily office. Now there's a whole set of resources within the lawyers and accountants and other advisors that can help you to find your way in navigating through these different transitions and changes.
Absolutely. So moving on to the challenging topic of breaking down, sometimes the enterprise breaking down can be very traumatic, can be confusing. It can take a long time to fix. And of course, it's important to try to avoid breakdowns, either governance or communication or value system or conflict between the founders and the management. There's so many hot points. And also, I think the efficiency of the organizations, of the operating and family office organizations, they don't have the best practices of large corporations. So if you could just talk a bit about those failure touch points, what is happening beneath the surface? What is the balance of, let's say, what's practical failures versus relational failures?
In my experience, I was reflecting on this recently. What are the common failure patterns that I see? If you take one successful family enterprises and what causes them to come apart, I came with what I call these 6 killer Ds. These are things that are the common reasons why those that have been able to achieve a position of success have seen that fall apart. I'll just tick through them quickly. One is what I'll call dissatisfaction, that people just lose that sense of, why are we doing this? Like, why be in business together? It's a lot of work. It's a lot of struggle. We don't have that sense as to why it's valuable. A second kind of connects point on governance, what I'll call dissension, which is that decision-making just gets hard. It gets complicated. It gets muddled as the complexity. The family gets larger. We don't have that single person to kind of make decisions for us before as we did, and we don't replace it with a functioning governance system. So it just becomes harder and harder to find points of agreement. Third is disconnection. People kind of lose perspective. They become beneficiaries rather than more engaged owners. And they just become reluctant to bring their time and talent, whether that's working there, whether that's serving on family councils or investment committees or boards. They just lose that sense of interest and passion. The next one is distrust. Family enterprises really are sort of powered by trust between the own family, the employees, and so on. And when leaders lose that support of the shareholders or of the next gen, of spouses, etc., it becomes really challenging to keep this thing going. And then families also face disruption like any other business where you're used to investing in a certain way, you're used to being in a certain business, and then the world changes around you. Many companies are kind of rethinking about AI, kind of how that affects the ways they operate their business. Do we still have something relevant in today's world? And the last one is discontinuity, meaning that you sort of go across generations and things kind of stay static for a long time. You might have a generation that's in a leadership role for 20, 30 years, and all of a sudden things change dramatically overnight, and you fail to navigate those constellation of changes. These are kind of some of the common patterns that kind of lead to it. I do think that there are a mix of both things that are strategic, meaning these are decisions that you can make and get out ahead of it. But fundamentally, at the core of any family enterprise are those relationships. And you have to find a way to reinvent them as you go across time in order to deal with some of these natural challenges that you're going to face as a family enterprise.
Just a follow-up question. Of the major issues that create crisis, what is the ratio? What is the balance of what's predictable if you look at the empirical patterns?
I think we have to be a little bit careful, like in terms of empirics. Whenever we're talking about mostly private enterprises, I think we all have to have a level of humility that the short answer to every question is that we don't know with a degree of confidence, because it's easy to find the success rates, the success stories, and to build arguments on top of those that have done wonderful things. But we don't know the people that have tried the same things and failed. So I just want to be pragmatic about that. What I would say from my experience is that when I see a family that has gone through a challenging time, a feud, a lawsuit, a dissolution of their family enterprise, and you assess what they have done and haven't done against what we know are good practices, the vast majority of time, it's not because they've tried everything that we know works and haven't been able to be successful. It's because they haven't done a number of the things that we at least have indicators are good practices, like having family members work outside the business or having boards with truly independent directors. There are a number of practices that I think we have enough experience to say are likely to be effective. And most of the time when families are facing these major disruptions and traumatic events, it's because they haven't done those things, which I think is in some ways unfortunate. In other ways should be empowering, because it means that if you do these things and learn from those around you that sort of have some guidance on how to navigate it, it actually significantly increases your odds of making a family enterprise work successfully.
So lastly, Josh, the future of the family enterprise in 5 minutes. There's a lot of incredible things going on, as you said, in the industry, institutionalization, expansion, multifamily office creation, large operating company creation, cross-border collaboration, even integration, collaboration with governments, of course, technology. There's so much going on. So let's talk about your opinion, your view of the industry. If you had to define the families that are most likely to thrive, let's say for the next decades, those qualities that can create the basis for that success given where we are today.
Absolutely. And I think in a single word, I would say it's fundamentally about culture. I gave some killer Ds. So on the flip side of the ledger, I'll offer some cultural Cs, like some things that I think define, in my experience, the families that are going to be best able to navigate everything that's in front of us, all the things that you described. And by the way, families have always had to navigate challenge and disruption and so on. And I do think the ones that are able to do that take a certain way of handling their family enterprise. For one thing, I think one of the underrated aspects of making a family enterprise succeed is choice. I always tell people, you don't have to do this. Like, a family enterprise is not required of you. And I mean that both as a family more broadly, but also as an individual. Asking that question, do we want to continue to do this? And choosing it both collectively, but also giving people an opportunity to opt out if they don't want to do it is really, really important. Partly it's because of the second C, which is collaboration, that fundamentally the families that are able to be successful are the ones that commit to doing the work together, because this is a team sport, right? You can't just have strong individuals. You have to be willing to sit around a table, have tough conversations, emotional conversations, and be committed to working on that together to be successful. And part of that's because of the third C, which is change, right? Because that is the constant, that will be the thing that we're going to have to continue to navigate, is that you have to be willing to adapt, to realize that what got you here into this generation might not get you there to the next generation, but also knowing what you can't change. What are the bright lines? What are the values? What are the things that are fundamental about your family and your family enterprise that should stay constant no matter what else is happening in the world? And that leads to the fourth C, which is, I think the families that are successful never believe that they understand fully what's going on in the world. They never think they have it mastered. They're constantly asking questions. They're learning from others. They're listening to Audiocast. They're going to conferences rather than thinking that they have it all figured out. And then the last C is celebration, because this is hard work. It is challenging. It is difficult to sort of own things with your relatives. It's not an easy thing to do day in and day out. Again, the families I find that are the most successful, they celebrate the wins, the big ones, the small ones, rather than playing the credit game, which is like, who deserves credit for this decision or that decision? They play the appreciation game. In fact, many families will actually end their meetings by expressing appreciation for each other and for the contributions that you make. Leaning into some of these elements, you can create a culture around your family enterprise that can allow you to navigate whatever it is that is in front of you, both from the broader business world, but also from your own. Having that foundation and renewing that cultural foundation gives you the best chance to be successful in light of everything that you have to navigate as a family.
That's fantastic. We're going to wrap up shortly, but just one more minute on curiosity. I'm glad you brought that up. Just go a little bit deeper into how to create that culture within the family business.
Yeah, I think that how you create that is by asking questions, by challenging yourself. And I think it ultimately, like most things in the culture, it has to be fundamentally set by those who are in leadership positions. And the way that you do that is you say, I know that we've done really well as a family. You know, it's very clear from our net worth and so on that we've done well, our reputation or status, but we still need to continue to learn. So let's go to a family business conference, read books together and share what we're learning. I think it's really up to the leaders of the family enterprise, not just the business leader, but from the family council or the owner council or the board, foster that sense of asking questions, of going out there and continuing to explore, and not sort of saying, well, we've got it, we understand it, like look at our track record, clearly we know what we're doing. It's never being satisfied. It's knowing that you can always do better, you can always improve, not in the way that you're being negative on yourself. You're saying like, there's always something else out there, there's always a next horizon. Let's lead the charge in figuring that out and making sure that our family is truly a learning organization, a family that really tries to get to know what is the next thing in front of us.
Thank you for that. I think that's really important, undercovered factor to both create an environment for the next gen that is accommodating and involves them, but also can create that preparation of openness and curiosity, can create just better communication and better dialogue, which is great. So thank you. That's a wrap today. Of course, we could just talk for hours. I hope you enjoyed today, and I'm so happy to have you on the podcast today, representing both yourself and, of course, your association is wonderful with Banyan and Harvard Business School. I'd like to thank you and, of course, our audience today on the Audiocast. One of the central ideas today is that enduring family enterprises are not just built solely through the capital and wealth and legal structures, but they're really built with intention and the development of people, trust, and governance and responsibility across generations. We see now that families that thrive long-term, like we were talking about at the end of the podcast, are not simply transferring the wealth, but they're building institutions capable of continuity that involves families, values, purpose, and stewardship. Josh, thank you again for these insights and your leadership with us.
Thank you, Adam. It's been a pleasure. I've enjoyed the conversation.
This is Artem Smith signing off. Please stay tuned for the next episode of the Family Business Audiocast.